If you enjoy what you hear here today, please consider supporting me on my Patreon page. Every dollar helps, and you get to see content that you won't see here. Chapter 19 Queen Draco Part 1
Run!
None of them needed telling twice, as they all turned tail quickly and began to sprint in the opposite direction of the incoming swarm, conveniently leading directly back to the pathway that led through to the forest. The only thing keeping their hooves on the ground and their wings folded was an unwillingness to abandon those among the group unable to fly. By the time they had made it to the path, putrid, fiery green spells were impacting around them like an acidic rainfall, only missing because of the remaining distance and the fling group's own situational awareness. They proceeded up the narrow cutting, and Twilight lit her horn, magically striking out at a cluster of boulders higher up the side of the steep mountainside, causing a large chunk to collapse and rain down, completely blocking off all entrance between the pathway and the hive itself. While it wouldn't stop the flying changelings, when combined with the pathway's narrow passage, it would at least slow them down. Indeed, the swarm had slowed on reaching the passage, much of it dispersing in favor of a smaller force of changelings moving in to continue the pursuit. Among this smaller force, a changeling queen with a piece of regalia strapped to her chest was at their head.
Queen Draco's 6 o'clock! Broadsword shouted as they ran, and she's angry.
Queen Twilight barely spared a glance back as she led her ponies and changelings forwards. She couldn't afford to. They couldn't risk a confrontation. Their only hope was to stay ahead of their pursuers and lose them in the forest's canopy. An idea that was crushed when they saw that the pathway up ahead had been collapsed in already, a dozen of Draco's changelings crawling all along the surfaces of the piled-up boulders. Some stood upright on their hooves, others stood on near vertical surfaces, but all were waiting for the same prey. On seeing their targets, they all homed their gazes forwards and then let out terrifying hisses in unison, standing up in aggressive poses. The ponies and changelings with Queen Twilight all screeched to a sudden halt, their eyes shifting back and forth between the blockage ahead and the rapidly approaching changeling queen behind them.
We're boxed in, Shining Armor shouted. Twilight, what now?
Can you grab the non-flyers and carry them over the blockage? Spike asked hurriedly.
We'd be picked off before we made it, Broadsword rebuked. We might need to fight.
Twilight growled, her alarm increasing with each passing millisecond. She looked frantically around for some method of escape, and something just caught the corner of her eye.
Up there,
Vladimir shouted, having also spotted it.
What's that?
Up the side of the mountain, a gaping hole filled with naught but darkness watched the unfolding events below. It wasn't a very inviting hole, but it was a gift horse they couldn't afford to look in the mouth.
Hang on!
Twilight shouted, her horn glowing with a bright lavender as fiery portals consumed herself and all 9 of her companions. Just as they finished sinking into the ground, a barrage of magic scorched the entire area where they had just been standing. Queen Draco and her changelings barreled into the ground a moment later. Draco examined the dirt around her hooves with a snarl, her fangs glimmering angrily in the morning sunlight. Her glowing red eyes glanced upwards, just catching sight of her prey emerging above them. The group in question recovered quickly, just in time for a beam of green magic to shoot up from below and narrowly avoid one of Broadsword's Solar Guard's ponies.
Inside the cave, now!
Twilight shrieked, all but pushing her allies forwards into the dark abyss. All continued to run, venturing into the darkness with only the faint lavender glow of Twilight's horn acting as a beacon to keep them on the right path, and not become forever lost within the depths of the mountain. They kept moving through various twists and turns, through branching paths leading further in, all in an effort to completely lose their pursuers, to great success. By the time their adrenaline had died down and they allowed themselves to rest, there was no sign of Queen Draco or her changelings. The problem was, they too had no idea where they were.
So, we're lost, aren't we?
Vladimir asked after taking the time to catch his breath. Better than being dead, Spike muttered in reply. Where are we? Twilight allowed her horn to brighten further, and the group of 10 examined their surroundings in detail. Cave walls closed them in on all sides, with beams of wood holding up the passage with various mining equipment scattered on the floor, heavily decayed through time. Cobwebs clung to the wood, and drips of water pattered down from the ceiling under the floor below.
A mine shaft,
Twilight commented.
heavily disused. Must have been used by my friend's hive at some point in time. Perhaps during the construction of the hive itself?
Not the time for a history lesson, Twi, Shining stated. We need to find a safe way out of here, and I doubt your friend will give up so easily.
You're right,
Twilight agreed.
but we'll have to explore. Where we entered wasn't an entrance. The true entrance to this mine must be around somewhere.
I have a bad feeling about this, one of the changelings muttered. Vladimir rolled his eyes. An angry hive is after us. We're lost in an ancient mine filled with who knows what. Yeah, what could possibly be giving you a bad feeling, Mr. State the Obvious? A little discipline, please, Shining Armor scolded. We've been through a lot, but we can't lose our heads now. Yeah. Sorry. There were only 2 passages leading out of the current chamber, one being from where they had come from, and the other leading further into the mountain. Shining cautiously looked into the passageway leading forwards, lighting his own horn and casting a floating ball of light down the hallway. The pink light clearly showed that the passage was empty, stretching a little ways before coming to an intersection. Shining Armor sighed. I suppose we don't have much choice but to press on, do we? The Changeling Queen shook her head, quickly moving to take the lead once more. Her changelings and her brother stayed close to her side, with the others guarding their flank. Their progress was slow and cautious, but steady. The entire mine was eerily silent, aside from the occasional spider sitting within its web. There were a few moments, however, when the group was forced to stop their progress as the sound of distant hooves and buzzing wings echoed down the many corridors. Only once all signs of Queen Draco and her hive disappeared did they allow themselves to breathe again. Eventually, a span of time went by without any more signs of Queen Draco. There was also an increasing amount of abandoned tools and carts around, indicating they were reaching the center of the mine. If that was indeed the case, they were all rather hoping they could find a way out from there. However, as they approached the center of the mine, a great rumbling sound suddenly made itself known. Vladimir stopped. What is that? All of their ears swiveled, homing in on the sound. It was definitely coming from further down the passageway, and a slight breeze was also noticeable coming from that direction. Are we near an exit? Broadsword rhetorically asked. That's definitely a breeze. I don't see any light up ahead, Spike pointed out. Maybe it's just out of sight? Let's try not to get our hopes up too much, Vladimir said. Maybe go for a cautiously optimistic approach instead?
There's only one way to find out,
Queen Twilight stated factually.
We press on, carefully.
What do you think we've been doing all this time? Spike deadpanned. Twilight elected to ignore the dragon's snide remark, and instead continued on forward with the others falling into step behind her. As they continued down the passage, they found an ascending incline, and at the top there was most definitely a light seeping into the passageway. However, the light didn't look like it came from the sun, and seemed more artificial. It was a bluish purple, glowing rather than shining. They couldn't detect even the slightest bit of warmth coming from it as they approached. If anything, it reminded Twilight ever so slightly of the constellation she would see in Princess Luna's wondrously flowing mane. All question of theirs would be answered soon enough, though. As they stepped out of the passageway and fully into the light, they found themselves in a vast cavern with dozens of passageways leading out of it. Abandoned mining equipment was everywhere, left to turn into dust by the presumably long-dead owners. The cavern's floor was only partial, however, and a large tunnel that could fit a dragon the size of Dragon Lord Ember's father, former Dragon Lord Torch, was at one end. The tunnel progressed further down into the mountain, leading to an unknown destination. They didn't need to ask why such a large structure intersected with the mine due to the presence of something sleeping soundly at the entrance of that large tunnel. An Ursa Major. Oh, crap! Vladimir shook his head after making that statement, refocused his eyes, and then examined the site again just to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. He wasn't sure the massive glowing beast was truly even there. Its body lit up the entire cavern, with what appeared to be constellations dancing around gleefully as the beast slept in peace. Its steady breathing was directed at the corridor, which the group had just exited, sending a shallow breeze down the passage past the ponies and changelings. So, how do we deal with that? Spike asked sheepishly. I mean, that's pretty big. Yeah, no way Trixie ever brought one down.
It's asleep.
Twilight noted.
As long as we're quiet, it'll stay that way.
Alright, but where do we go from here? Shining Armor asked. There are a lot of passages here. That tunnel behind the Ursa must lead outside, Vladimir stated. Could we follow that? We don't know how far it is, where it exits, or if any more of these creatures may be encountered along the way, Broadsword rebuked. It probably leads out right in the middle of the mountains, which is not very helpful for us. The beast stirred slightly, shifting its head and allowing the breeze to turn away from the group and instead flow down another passageway. My queen, one of the changelings spoke, pointing at a passageway on the far side of the chamber. That passage has the biggest concentration of equipment surrounding it, possibly organized so the miners could collect what they needed as they entered. Might be an exit. Or they just kept it there for another reason, one of the solar guards stated.
Possibly,
Twilight said, humming in thought as the beast continued to snore.
But it's a lead. We can start with that passageway.
The sound of hooves caught their attention, and the group all turned to look to where the sound was coming from. It was coming from the exact passage the beast's breath was traveling down, and, just as it had with Twilight's group, it had drawn Queen Draco and her changelings to the central chamber. Oh crap! Vladimir said for a second time. The changelings spotted them immediately, and one overzealous drone quickly charged his horn and fired. Wait! Queen Draco bellowed, too late. The hastily fired spell veered off course and, instead of hitting its intended targets, barreled straight into the muzzle of the slumbering Ursa Major. Silence reigned throughout the cavern, both groups freezing and slowly turning their gazes to the giant creature. A creature whose eyelids had suddenly fluttered open.